What's up guys? In this video I wanted to outline and share the story of a buck I ended up naming the Split G2 buck. This is a buck that I ended up getting photos of, started to idolize about him, make a plan, and had an awesome encounter with a shot fired, as you guys are going to see here in the next couple minutes. But before we get into the video, if you guys haven't already done so, please make sure you hit the subscribe button. We've got some crazy content, awesome content coming at you guys here. Not just this video, but more videos to come. So make sure you guys hit the thumbs up button and subscribe. Really appreciate it, and it really helps the channel grow. So without further ado, we'll jump right into the story. So after having a lot of great hunts going into November, had a lot of vacation time to burn, I ended up going back and trying to hone in onto a piece of private property that I knew there was big bucks in the region. We had trail camera photos of good deer that I was looking for, but up until this next hunt you're about to see, I really had no idea how big this Split G2 buck was. Hunter actually encountered this deer middle of October, and he sent me a text saying that there was a big 160s Split G2 buck. But at that time I had already had some great encounters with some other really big deer, and I don't know if it was, him not really playing it up to be that big of a deer, or it was just my mind telling me there's a big deer everywhere. Just get in line at that point. So I don't really think I had a general idea of how big this deer really was until I saw trail camera photos of him. So for that afternoon hunt, my main goal was just to hunt by that trail camera just so we could finally check it, because it hadn't been checked in over a month, and I wanted to see what was using it to, maybe see if there was some action that I was missing on the few days that I wasn't hunting this stand, and could make a game plan on how I could try to target some of these deer. But I ended up getting a picture of a deer, the Split G2 buck, that after seeing photos of him, I was bound and determined that that was the deer that I wanted for the season. If in my mind I said if I wasn't able to harvest this deer and eat tag soup, I was okay with it, but I really wanted to try to target this deer. That afternoon I had a great start to my hunt, ended up doing a quick rattling sequence, and brought a really good up-and-comer buck right under the stand. With no sighting of the Split G2 buck that afternoon, I decided to go back to the tree that I had been hunting the week prior, in hopes that I'd try to catch the buck without a doe, searching for another. To my surprise, I ended up having a wild encounter right after sunrise. right here. It's really still. So far this morning's off to a really good start. I came in here, kind of into the same tree that I was hunting with Heidi quite a bit last week when it was hot. And yesterday, I came in here, kind of the same general spot, and I went and I hunted further to the north, about one little secondary ridge over. We actually had a trail camera up in there, and the main reason why I hunted that is because I wanted to see what was on trail camera. Got a couple really good bucks. One buck that I'm really trying to target. I call him just the split G2 buck. He's great big. He's probably 160s. Super heavy, massive. Big mature buck. And I decided to sit on this ridge because the wind's supposed to be kind of southwest this morning, changing to west. And how it sets up, I thought it'd be better for this place all day because the wind would be blowing into a spot I really don't expect to see deer. I got in here and set up because I'm doing a hanging hunt. It took me longer than I thought it was going to. And I really got set up I was ready to go pretty much at first light. And I heard something behind me. And it ended up being that great big, non-typical buck. He's not going to score anything. But he was kind of like out of bow range. And I really wasn't sure if I wanted to shoot him or not. And then I ended up hearing something down closer to the creek. And then next thing I know, there's two deer at the bottom of the creek. One of them's the split G2 buck, great big buck. And the big non-typical starts pushing that deer and literally just postures up and walks behind him. And at one point I thought he was gonna push him down here, close enough for like a 40-yard shot. But he never came closer than 80 yards in the timber. And they ended up going further to the north of me. The G2 buck had his tail tucked from the buck that was pushing him. And then he ended up going up that ridge. And that other one, I lost sight of him, the non-typical buck. I assume he followed. But he's in here. I'm just not sure what he's going to do now that one buck pushed him away. I hope he doesn't go a long ways away. I'm assuming he's going up to the top of this ridge, but he doesn't have a doe. So this is a good day to sit all day because there's always doe family groups in this bottom. So I'm hoping he'll stick around and we'll see him again later. Man, he's big. Despite having a great encounter early on in the morning, I decided to move a couple 100 yards away due to the wind. Although the weather was calling for sustained winds out of the west, I was continuing getting strong southeast wind gusts that would completely ruin this spot. So at around 11 o'clock, I decided to jump down and move my location in order to get the wind back in my favor for the rest of the day. While I was moving that stand, I actually ran into the big Spikezilla buck about 80 yards away. He never knew I was there, but I knew that since he was around, there was probably a good chance that I was not going to be able to see that split G2 buck, because from the prior morning, that buck had run the split G2 buck off. So despite seeing the Spikezilla buck, I decided to continue to sit in that spot the rest of the afternoon. My hope is that the Spikezilla buck would eventually work far enough away that there could be a chance that the split G2 buck could venture back through. But the afternoon was slow, only producing one sighting of a small 1-year-old buck about an hour before last light. So on November 17th, I decided to try to push in closer to the creek. My thought was that the buck, if he didn't have another doe already, he would continue to try to do that same pattern to try to find himself another doe. So that's what I did. I got up early, went down into the creek, and hung a stand. in here. I got none of that on footage, I don't think. It was him. It was the split G2 buck. He was literally walking the creek. Literally walking the creek. And stupid me, I'm sitting. I just took a break because my feet were freezing. And all of a sudden I heard something behind me in the water. And I looked behind me and it was him. He was just standing there 20 yards. And he started to walk to my right. And by the time I got stood up, I was trying to figure out the camera. And then I was trying to figure out my release, because I had my release on upside down because my metal was hitting the camera arm when I was trying to film those does. Oh God. Fudge. Oh God. Don't fall out of the tree. My legs are shaking so bad. But he saw me. I was trying to swing my release on one-handed, swing it over to the right side. Oh God, oh man. And he literally, he was gonna step into an opening when I finally got my release around, and I was gonna shoot him at 30. He ran and he stopped at 43 yards. I can make that shot. He ran out like a second. He was bolting. I know where I hit. I know where he kind of ran. He kind of ran into the creek a little bit, so it was going to make it hard. Oh my gosh, he's huge. Oh crap. Shoot. I'm going to have to give it some time. Dang it, but yes. I'm not going to feel good until I have this deer. I'm shaking so bad, this stand is moving. It's ringing. I just shot the split G2 buck. I'm not kidding. So I don't know if are you there? I don't know. He came in. Oh, I'm gonna call him at the top of the hill. So unfortunately I was not able to get the shot on film like you guys saw. I went into hunting mode, and to be honest, I really wasn't expecting to be able to get a shot. The buck actually bound off to about 43 yards. It actually was 43 yards because I was able to range him. And how it worked out is he was standing there in a small opening between a split and a big oak tree. And I had an opening, and I looked at the opening, and I decided that I could make that shot. And I felt confident in the shot, and I decided to take the shot. The buck was quartering away, and I aimed for shooting to the offside shoulder like you should. And the arrow actually stuck in the deer, and that's the first time that I've actually experienced that, I think, in a long time of bow hunting. So my shot felt good. Since I did not get a pass through on that deer, I actually could see my exact point of impact on that buck. So the arrow hit and the buck literally took off faster than I've ever seen a deer run in my entire life. It was insane. He jumped down into the creek, and I saw him running through the creek away from me until I couldn't see him anymore. And I didn't know if I heard him crash or if he stopped to just kind of stand there and look around. But I ended up giving him probably an hour and a half or so before I finally got down, went and checked first blood to see what it looked like, and deciding to pursue or not. I ended up going down, checking my arrow, and found some bubbles in the blood. And it made me to believe, since I had good blood and I had good tracks to follow, the deer is in the creek, and I had thought that it was a great shot, that the deer probably wasn't very far after looking at the blood. So I ended up following the deer for a couple hundred yards in the creek until finally I kept being able to tell that the buck was moving fast still. He didn't actually slow down, and so I decided to back out, give it a couple more hours, because I figured it would not hurt to give the buck a couple more hours and go change into some different clothing to go bust through some brush. Now usually when you shoot a deer, they'll run down and they'll cross a creek, or they'll jump up and get on the bank or whatnot. This deer, he would literally, if there was a bend in the creek, he'd follow it. If there was brush down in it, he'd figure out a way to quickly go through it. it was insane that I could not understand why this buck wanted to continue to stay in the creek. And every track that I found, it looked like he was still running. So at one point I thought he was just going to die on his feet, because I still thought it was a good shot. But I ended up following the deer until dark, and he probably at that point was probably a half mile away at most. But I'm not kidding you guys, the tracks of this deer were running the entire time. So after having darkness set in, I decided to, call it off until the morning, because I was having a harder time finding blood in the dark. My eyes don't pick up blood that well, especially in the dark. So I ended up going back, talking to Hunter and asking him, telling him everything that happened. And after talking to him, we really started to believe that he could have traveled that distance, in a matter of a few minutes, since he was running. Now, whitetail can travel really fast. So decided to go back the next day. Had to give it another shot, especially on the caliber of that deer, to hopefully be able to find him and be able to recover him. I don't want to see a deer like that go to waste. So I went back out the next day, tracked for another, I think 4 hours or so, found my arrow, which was actually covered from tip to tail in blood. Looked awesome. Once I found the arrow, I was starting to get pretty jacked up. I thought for sure I was going to find the buck, because I was finding better blood after the arrow came out. And I found his first bed finally, probably, probably 3/4 of a mile away from first impact. So I was finally feeling good that the buck was probably at that point where he was going to just start to bed and just keep changing beds. He had water nearby, because I thought it was a liver hit on entrance, and it caught with the angle, it would have caught one lung at least. So I thought that he was sticking by water. But after that first bed, had good blood for a while, and then probably a couple 100 yards away, it literally just dried up to nothing, and I couldn't find blood anymore. I didn't know what to do. At that point, the blood trail had led me off of the property that we have to hunt and onto a neighboring property. In the state of Iowa, you can legally track a deer as long as you don't have your weapon on you. So obviously I left the weapon back on our side of the fence and tried to pursue the deer, and I was not able to get in contact with the landowner beforehand. But after I called off the search and I decided that I was not going to find this deer, I wanted to try to still do everything that I possibly could, because I still felt like the deer was dead. So I ended up making notes and putting notes up on the gate to the other property owner, just letting him know, one, hey, I was on your property. These are the reasons why I was looking for this specific deer. I hit the deer, not sure what happened, ran out of blood. But my main goal with it was to, one, explain to him why I was on his property, to be ethical and a good person, and two, hope that, maybe if they saw the deer, or if they got trail camera photos of the deer, that they would, tell me that, either he's alive, or, even during shed season, if they found him, that, they'd be able to say, hey, he did die. So I could at least close the chapter of this book. Long story short, it was an unpleasant encounter with one of the property owners. So I had to leave it at that. But I was unfortunately not able to recover that deer. And to this day, it still hurts. Mainly because I work so hard in the off season to make sure this never happens. I hate when people say it's just part of bow hunting, because I feel like as a hunter, there's a lot of things that I could do to change that, and that's what I'm gonna get into here in a second. But I mean, I haven't lost a deer in over 8 to 10 years. This one really stung, mainly because it was the buck of my dreams, I guess you could say. But losing a deer is never fun. I don't care if it's this buck or if it's a doe. As a bow hunter, you always want to make sure that you are able to take down the deer that you shoot. So I ended up going out and hunting some more, which you guys will see in the following videos. But I wanted to kind of break down some of the things that I took away from this experience. That way you guys can learn from it. Hopefully you guys will never have to deal with this same experience. So I just wanted to kind of break those down here quick. First and foremost, a lot of people, when they have an experience like this, they're gonna go straight to their equipment. They're gonna blame their equipment. And to this day, I don't think my equipment failed me. I really don't. Like I discussed earlier, I was shooting mechanical broadheads, but everything else in my system was the same as before. Now I have always had pass-throughs on deer, and this was actually the first year that I haven't had a pass-through on, but I switched over to these mechanicals still believing that I was going to get a pass-through on a deer. My thought was, even if I didn't get a pass-through, that I shoot great big long arrows and it was gonna get an ample amount of penetration, which this case it did. I actually only had about this much distance between my fletchings and the deer hide. So I shoot 30-inch draw. My arrows are like spears. So it had plenty of penetration to get in there, but I just wasn't expecting not to get a pass-through, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. I went back and forth on, is it best to always have a pass-through, or, is it okay for the arrow to be still stuck in him? Because in my head, it was like, okay, I got a great big broadhead stuck in this deer. It's going to continue to cut. But after shooting a doe with this a few weeks later and getting a pass-through, what I realized was the broadheads, they do perform. But two, I realized that, with that buck, I shot him, he was alert and he was nervous. And when I shot him and it hit him, it had to have not felt good. And so at that point, the buck, like I said, he took off as fast as he possibly could and he didn't stop. And looking at his tracks, I don't think he actually stopped until the arrow came out of him. And at that point, initially I was like, well, good, that means he can't clop back up. But thinking it through, and after shooting a doe with it weeks prior, after I shot that doe, I shot her, the arrow passed through her like I've always experienced. The deer ran and stopped and then fell over. But this buck didn't ever stop because he was nervous. He knew something was wrong. And then when I shot and I hit him, he had an arrow stuck in him and he just took off because I had to have not felt good, obviously. So main takeaway is try to get an arrow set up and a broadhead set up that is going to have a pass-through. Now, I'm not saying you got to shoot 700 grains to get a pass-through. My old setup and this setup does get a pass-through at 30 yards. Now, I've never had shot a deer quartering away at this scenario, even with my fixed blades. So I'm not sure if it would have gotten a pass-through or not. So I couldn't tell you, but I didn't get a pass-through. So what I'm trying to say is, try to experiment with broadhead setups and some arrow setups to try to make sure that you do get that pass-through. Because, even though I'm not blaming the equipment, if I would have had my fixed blades on, or if it would have been, less quartering away shot, I might have gotten a pass-through, and that might have meant that the buck would have ran a little ways and stopped and then eventually bedded down sooner. But since he didn't, he just traveled a long ways and he made it so much harder. My second key takeaway has a couple different points to it, but mainly I set up the stand facing away from where I had seen the deer move the day prior. And I really expected the deer to probably come from that direction. But I thought, it's November, he can come from any direction. But if he did end up coming from that direction, I thought it would have been fine, because if I'm self-filming, I'm hiding behind the tree, I thought he'd probably walk by and then it would have been a perfect quartering away shot. But what I wasn't expecting was the deer to be literally in the creek. And we had never hunted across the creek before until I hunted that. And the buck was in the creek and he ended up hitting my ground scent, the exact spot that I crossed. It was 20 yards from the tree. At that point, he hit my ground scent and he got nervous. And from there, my My release was on upside down. It was a whole messy situation. And by the time that I could get a shot off at the buck, he was already too alert, and that's when he bound off to the further distance. Looking back, I wish I was set up facing the other way. There's two different thoughts in my head. I wish I was facing the other way, but there's a better chance that the buck would have seen me sooner. Plus, I still go back to that it was a good shot. I hit where I wanted it to. It didn't have anything to do with my archery. I think I just should not have taken that shot. I'm not sure if I necessarily panicked, but I got to the situation. Things were happening fast. I made quick decisions, decisions that I still felt confident in. But looking back, I keep going back and saying, well, maybe if you didn't take that shot, that buck would still be alive today, or that buck would have still been alive November 18th, and I could have gone back in and tried to get it done then. So there's a lot of shoulda, woulda, couldas, but at the end of the day, I ended up not being able to harvest that buck. So definitely something that hurts and that sucks, but hopefully you guys have taken away something from this video. You've learned from it, and hopefully you've enjoyed it. So if you have, please make sure you hit the thumbs up button and to subscribe. Put your comments in below. Be nice to me. But we've got a lot of awesome content coming at you guys here on the channel still, so stay tuned for that. My tag's not punched, so we're going after a big one. Let's hope we can get one.